Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another Destiny Movie Night Hangout. I'm your host, Mike, and I'm here today with our amazing guest, Adrian Blackburn. Adrian, where are you coming from today?
I am located in Ottawa, Canada, and in relation to you, maybe about 10 meters.
You're just upstairs.
That's true. Yes, we had to be in different rooms for this call to make everything work technically.
Yes, sir. The movie Hangout today is Any Given Sunday. It's okay to watch this Hangout if you have or have not seen the movie thus far. The movie Any Given Sunday, really it's focused around a football team, specifically the coach on the football team, and within this, the various relationships that take place in and around the coach and the football team. The coach being kind of like at the center point, connected to management, the doctors, his family in relation to it, the players, and their points. So there's a lot of relationship dynamics that showcases in the world of like professional sports here. Now within the football team, you could say there's a bit of a story here, as it kind of begins where the main player on the team, the quarterback, gets hurt, and then there's a backup quarterback, and he also got hurt, which is not generally that common per se. And so then the third string quarterback is thrust into the limelight. He's kind of not even expecting to play at all, and he's basically got to take on that point of responsibility, even though the odds were that he wasn't going to have to be in that position. And then from there, there's a lot of different playouts that happen as a result of that, in terms of like doing things by the book the right way versus going on instinct and just doing what he thinks is best. And then also the point of like sacrifice for the greater good, and what that means in regards to the football and winning, like winning at all costs. Like for instance, the number one quarterback who gets hurt is an older guy, and basically he's been just taking copious amounts of drugs so that he is able to keep playing. And the doctor, who the football player places a lot of trust in, is kind of being deceptive towards him and many of the other players on the team, where it's kind of like a bit of a detrimental reliance, where the doctor has like the Hippocratic Oath, but this point is somewhat negated because it's about winning and having the best players play, and even at the expense of their livelihood and their body. And we see that many of the players, even when faced with the point that like there's serious consequences of these drugs and not feeling the pain that your body's actually in, and wanting to put those risks into play for the potential gain, which is the big salary money and the ego stroking that goes with being a winner, like on the field, winning a championship, whatnot. So that's that's a bit of a paraphrase onto the movie. There's many more points within that, obviously, but I think that's a pretty good introduction. Adrian, I know you also, even as a child, played football. So what would you like to jump into here?
Yeah, that's a great synopsis of the movie. It is worth kind of knowing the sport a little bit to be able to understand the movie, because obviously you can take away the essentials, but knowing the game of football will sort of give you insights to those little inner workings and dynamics that take place. So in other words, it's kind of difficult to get into this movie without actually just getting into the sport of football. Because one thing that this movie does very well is it actually portrays quite effectively, quite accurately, sort of what it's like, especially in the world of professional football. They do a very good job of, let's say, not pulling punches and not trying to really sort of hide anything and make it look any prettier than it actually is. So the film actually does contrast how brutal, frankly, and how violent the game can be with the sort of fan experience of it all and all the fanfare that surrounds the game, which is, by contrast, quite naive, because you get glimpses of what's actually going on the field, in the trenches, the violence, the brutality, and that contrast with the people in the stands getting drunk and partying. So you have a real dichotomy and disconnect there, a real separation between the fans and then the ones that are actually on the front lines, quite frankly sacrificing their bodies for the game, for this whole experience.
Now, I found even the title to be, quite fitting in a lot of ways for the movie. Any given Sunday, basically.
Right. That goes to another sort of, sorry.
I was just going to say, specifically with regards to the religious connotations to it. Football is not only played on Sunday, but like Sunday is a big day for football watching fans and whatnot. And Sunday is also a big day for goers. And all in the movie with the team and a bit of a religion where, it shows early on they lose a game, and then it's the whole point that they have the priest in the dressing room and they pray, the God connotation. And then also specifically the third string quarterback who gets kind of thrust into the limelight. The coach asks him, where's your mother? Like, how come, where's she around? And he says to her, he's like, oh, Sunday is, she believes Sunday is like the day for church. And, for football fans, football is kind of like the gospel or the church for many. It's kind of become a religion in and of itself. The stadiums fit like, 60 to 100,000 people, depending on the size of the stadium. Quite a lot of people. There's like pre-game celebrations, which largely revolve around the consumption of alcohol, like it's a party before the game, and it's just this big extravaganza. Now, in the movie specifically, also with regards to the Sunday point, as the story progresses all the way towards the end, this guy's mother, and then by the end of the movie, you see her in the stands wearing her like Sunday church outfit. Like she's embraced the church of football, if you will, and is like basically moved from putting her time in the church, specifically going forth into the stadium.
Yeah, it's very interesting, that point of football being a Sunday event, and yes, the game of football essentially having become a religion. For instance, here in North America, we're already quite a sports heavy culture. We've got the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, the MLS, the NLL, the list goes on. But at the top of that ranking of sports leagues, the NFL is hands down by far the dominant one. It's sort of actually the one that all other major sports leagues follow. So yes, absolutely, it is more or less become a religion. It's actually quite funny because when I was young, I was not really raised religious in any way in my household, and so football in a way for me kind of ended up replacing really at that point. It was almost like a second best substitute for the religion point, because even though I wasn't raised religious, so to speak, I still had something to do religiously every Sunday, and then all throughout the week leading up to those Sundays. Yeah. Anyway, we'll maybe continue on to the next point from there.
Can also relate on the sport point. I mean, my sport of choice growing up wasn't football per se, but it was hockey, and to the point where like I was narrowed in my focus as just kind of being like, hockey is life, like just obsessed with hockey about it to the point of like disregarding a lot of other things here in and as a part of life because of my energy addiction, love obsession with hockey. So to the point, or go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the main point in terms of the thing that is most palpable that I would like to touch on, which is how the game takes over real life. I mean, it's funny, we call it a game. We market it as a game, package it as a game. I mean, we use that word over and over. But in fact, I mean, you'll notice that just because we draw lines around a field and we have a timer that we start and stop at the end of the match, just because we do those things and we call it things like a game does not mean that it is not still taking place in this world and this physical reality that we call life. So it's funny how we dichotomize the two. It's like I'll go play my little game now and then I'll go back to real life, apparently, as if you can separate the two and one is not influencing the other. So an obvious point there is, what a violent game it is, how competitive it is, how cutthroat it can be, and then obviously how that carries over into your real life, daily life experiences, through bolstering that mentality by participating in these games and these events and the whole mentality behind it. And it is a very it is specifically violent. Football more than any other sport really is about laying your body on the line for the cause, because I mean, injuries are just so common. I think I've even heard statistics about, the average career being, I think, maybe 3 years in length, something like that. So what I find specifically like a marked difference between, say, football compared to so many other sports is that it has a heavily militarized feel to it. And here, this is where I'm going into more the actual dynamics of the sport, where it's much more of an arrangement on a team where, it's not like, for instance, on a soccer team where every single player kicks the ball around on the soccer team. Everybody, every player does that one thing to differing capacities. So there's call it a point of sameness or even equality there. But in football, you've got a much more clearly defined role and ranking system where you've got, your team leaders, like for instance, the coach and the quarterback. And then beneath that, there's just sort of this hierarchy chain of command of a huge mass of people, frankly, that support and prop up the whole thing. Now, what is fascinating is that within this whole dynamic, who are the ones that get the most attention are, of course, the ones who are at the top and the leaders and more on the forefront. And then we tend to sort of just not really regard or acknowledge as much all the ones closer to the, beneath those leaders in the hierarchy, who are really the ones that are driving the whole thing. And most of the time, the ones who are putting their bodies on the line the most. I mean, the coach is a great example of that. I mean, the coach is the one person who, frankly, just doesn't get hurt. It's risk-free for him from that perspective. And you see that in the way that the people treat, for instance, football as a sport, where everybody might know the name of their quarterback or the coach, but when it comes to maybe the linemen on the team and they just become a bunch of grunts, basically. So it's really something that you can liken to sort of a military arrangement, where you've got really just your cannon fodder, your massive troops that really do all the grunt work and really lay their bodies down on the line. But the ones who are directing and orchestrating and everything, the generals, they're the ones who really get the recognition, and make the real decisions and are sort of the important ones.
I totally agree with that. Can you hold on just 10 seconds? I'm going to let my dog up the stairs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a wonderful thing about these Hangouts, is they are live. So wild and crazy unplanned events like this can occur. And currently we're experiencing some dog technical difficulties. Dog-related technical difficulty.
Dog-related difficulty. Yes. Yes. Real-time live. This broadcast is live. To touch on also what you were talking about with, like, the specific position, so much so, and the attention, depending what position you play, it garners, and not necessarily of the sacrifice, if you will, like you mentioned, the offensive lineman. Basically being at the grunt of it as like a hardcore laborer, if you will, as its task is specifically in and around the labor of it, but it doesn't kind of get, that man or that player so much so often doesn't get recognition as being a star player or whatnot, like does a good bulk of making the main player able to make the pass or the play per se. And what's interesting about that dynamic specifically in football, like you're saying, is that I'm seeing parallels to like the world system of classism, if you will, in terms of economic structure. Like specifically, if you have a white collar job or a blue collar job, you're like a high paid, banker or celebrity figure of some accord, versus, say the child making, thousands of Nike sneakers.
Yeah,
I mean that's quite a contrast there.
Yeah, I mean, you see, I mean, our society is so replete with hierarchical organizations of people. And that's what's fascinating about all of this, all of the sort of fun, nice, even polished veneer that we paint over, pro football and pro sports and things. I mean, there's so much, frankly, ugly that we are painting over in doing this. And that is one example where, for instance, through people participating in, football and supporting it and, this whole thing, what they're actually doing is supporting these hierarchical organizations of people in a very tacit, non-participatory sort of way. Even though people are actually participating it's what they may not be aware of that they are actually supporting in terms of very basic fundamental acceptances and allowances of ideas of what human organization ought to look like, should look like, right? everybody knows when something goes wrong with the team, you go talk to the coach. That's the guy to talk to. He's the one in charge. But actually, who are the ones busy doing all the work? So it's, yeah. Now, those are the effects that it has, you know, those are sort of, that's getting into sort of deeper effects that, you know, a game like that and participating in things it's having on people. The thing that I sort of see the most is the outright brutality that is literally right in front of people every single day, and the way that people treat each other on the football field, where they're deliberately trying to harm each other in pursuit of a cause which serves their own self-interest. And the fact that this brutal violence takes place in front of people and is merely just seen as acceptable and just cheered on, and again justified within that statement of, you know, it's just a game, you know, we're just having fun. You know, that's all there is to it. I mean, it's pretty scary, quite frankly, when you literally have people out there on a field trying to kill each other. And within our current society, this is what we have accepted and allowed as our definition of what it is to have fun and play a game.
Well, it's exciting, right? Yeah, I mean, it's really quite fascinating.
Yeah, and what is the excitement actually based on but the fear of losing, the fear of getting completely crushed and obliterated by the other team is actually where that excitement is coming from.
Well, it showcases, I find, so much so the world of professional sports because, you know, there's so much money propped up around it. I think is the point of patriotism. You know, like just like country, my country versus your country, whatnot. The idea recognition of like conflict as a point of, you know, healthy rivalry, like that it's like a necessary evil, if you will, or that it's like not even regarded necessarily as an evil per se, that it's just, you know, all in good fun or whatnot. But, you know, within that, like the games are so much so emotionally fueled charged that, like you're saying, it's you know, when you're out there on the field playing the game, it's about, you know, winning at all costs, and that, you know, you're out there to like crush the other guy. You know, like the talk, the banter amongst players is you know, often very violent in its nature, like, oh, I'm gonna crush him, or I'm gonna kill him, or like, you know, very much like they're the enemy, you know, because they're in the way of our glory, our winning. And it's you know, it's kind of like a WrestleMania, if you will. There's the dogs you know, concurring with the WrestleMania. It's like, yes, we wrestle. Our focus is violence through strong barking. And you know, this reflects back to my earlier years in sports and playing competitive sports also, specifically just around the points of egomania, if you will, because it was all about winning, wanting to win, the feelings, the positive feelings that are associated with that, and then also the opposite, like the anger or the rage or the disgust or the sadness and disappointment that's associated with not winning. So, you know, very much you see that it's like it's rooted in the rules of the game are rooted in fear. But then just the point of disregard. Like in the movie, you see early on, you know, one of the big parties that's happening, and because the football players, you know, as a general point, are accepted and regarded as you know, celebrities in society because they play on the big team. You know, there's that egomania that kind of goes with that with a lot of guys because you know, fanatics if you will, are fueling that behavior in so many ways. And the playouts are in both ways. Like, in the movie, it showcased a scenario where, a couple of football players are, banging girls, having sex with girls they don't really care about at all, but just want to like have sex with, and not really like regard, like have sex from a point of like regard as like a real sharing of intimacy or anything like that, but just like as the point of like, defining it, calling it uh, banging broads, if you will, as like that's a point that goes to like your prestige, if you will, like as a big ego that, you are able to like have sex with somebody who's like attractive in societal terms, and just basically kind of like throw them away kind of thing. And so there's like an extreme superiority inferiority relationship at play there. I mean, obviously it does take two to tango, there. So it's not to say like, the women in those particular instances portrayed in the movie were like totally innocent by any means. But just showcasing the general like lack of self-regard.
Yeah, all of the use and abuse of things and people and substances
Yeah,
done on the path to success, again, for the righteous cause, right? I mean, it's all yeah, you see that throughout the movie where, like, for instance, drugs and alcohol are just, they're very prevalent throughout the movie. And yeah, it's pretty noted how debaucherous the behavior of the players can be, actually, in the NFL and in particular. I mean, it happens in all of professional sports, but the NFL in particular almost is like there's like like a running joke that, a lot of these players, like, they're so just debaucherous, like they're just such dangerous people that, like, a lot of these guys probably would be in prison if they hadn't found, careers playing football. So and yeah, I mean, I played the game, as you mentioned, when I was younger, and I was quite serious about it when I was. And I can speak for that firsthand. I mean, it's a very, I mean, to be that violent and to carry out that kind of aggression against people, well, just people, any people, you have to be pretty fucked up. You have to be pretty angry. You have to be pretty nasty on the inside. You have to really be coming from a place of a lot of fear and pain and hurt sufficiently that it justifies doing all of these things. Because what's it all, again, what is the cause? What's it all for at the end of it? It's to be a winner. It's for success. It's for, all of these things apparently justify all this behavior, all this abuse. There's always that little carrot being dangled on the stick. And it's fascinating how such a thing makes it worth it, because all the things that you're getting with the winning, with being on the winning team or being the winner, all of the credit that you're getting, the adulation, the recognition, et cetera, is actually worth nothing. It's actually worth nothing at all whatsoever. If you do it well enough, as these players do, and you go to the absolute top level, of course, there will be consequences, like you might make a lot of money. Those kinds of things might come out of it. But I'm talking in the grand scheme, in terms of life and really what it means to live life and grow as a human being. You actually get absolutely nothing. And that is what I experienced basically when at the time that I stopped playing football, is really, for all of the glory or whatever it is that I had experienced, at the end of it, really, I was just the same person with, a broken shoulder and a little bit of a messed up knee. And really, that's all I came away with it. And that's the case for so many people. That's actually another point that I would really like to rays from the movie. There's a scene where the quarterback, one of the main characters of the movie, is in the sauna with one of the more veteran players. And the veteran player is basically sort of acting as like a teacher kind of thing, mentor, and telling the younger player that, you know, you think you're so great. Well, actually, you know, for every one of you that makes it, there's 100 who died trying. And that is very much the case. I'd actually say it's closer to maybe 1,000 who died trying, you know, for every one that makes it. There's a lot of unsung heroes. There's a lot of people who get sold on the fantasy of being a champion, who just end up with the broken bodies and none of the glory. There's way more of those people out there compared to the ones that make it. But we don't focus on those stories. We focus on the success stories. The point is always to keep the hope going and keep that alive, no matter how far your chances are at winning. And really, like, guys, if you look at it, if you're busy rooting for a pro sports team thinking that matters, I mean, have fun with it.
I mean, yeah, it kind of goes back to like gladiator times, right? Like the Roman Empire, the Colosseum. Like basically, you know, create the venue and the spectacle to entertain the masses, to basically take them away from
yeah.
you know,
Well, we were
thought.
noticing that when we were watching it the other day, that there were actual scenes from old gladiator movies in any given Sunday's movie. And
Yeah.
it's cool, but again, like there's so much that it's the veneer, again, the veneer that we paint over it to make it look, you know, just normal and acceptable. Like if you watch, for instance, an NFL broadcast, it's very polished. It's very professionally done. It's very just like clean, sterile.
Family fun.
So far from what it's actually like to actually be down there on ground level, like on the field. I mean, could you imagine, just put yourself there for a moment, could you imagine being on an NFL field right now, right here? Yeah, absolutely terrifying, you know, really no different from a war zone, you know. Yeah, I mean, there's
because somebody's coming at you from all these different ways, right? Like the potential of serious consequence, especially in the game of football, is well, very real. I mean, like you were mentioning earlier, you're saying the average career of a football player is 3 years, and that's basically because the skill set of a player is eroded that time, because they've been broken down for the most part. There's players that play longer, but specifically the average span is only that time because their physical body cannot hack it at that level because of the abuse that it.
Yeah. And it's fascinating if you just watch sports news, for instance, you're seeing that more and more, where cases of, you know, for instance, domestic violence or whatever, drug abuse, like all kinds of things are now coming up as legal cases more in the media that are coming out more than they used to. And another thing that we're seeing a lot more of, or at least hearing about it more often, is players having serious issues and consequences from their careers, you know, when they're done, when they finish. For instance, we've got a player like Junior Seau, who actually was one of the winners. He's actually like a Hall of Fame player, you know, had the model career, you know, the perfect ideal career. And it was only really a few years after he retired that this man ended up committing suicide. And so in the autopsy or whatever, they discovered that he had all of these, frankly, he had brain damage. He had a lot of physical damage to his body that they suspect, played a major role in his committing suicide. But the point is that you're hearing about those kinds of cases more and more often. And it's fascinating because even with this being a hot button topic right now in this, you know, sporting news, it's actually in the movie. what I'm talking about. These issues with player safety, and for instance, the issue of concussions, which is a huge topic right now in all of sports. I mean, this was like a central point in the whole movie with this one player who, you know, he needs to play because he wants to make his bonus on his salary and this kind of thing. But he's very close to being like a severe concussion case and really hurting his body. So anyway, this is a central storyline in the movie, and that's what you were talking about before, Mike, about the corrupt doctors on the team, where, you know, basically there's this player in the movie that shouldn't be playing, shouldn't be putting on his body on the line, because it's like at the point where he could literally die on the field, and he goes and he does it anyway for money. So this is in the movie, and this movie was released, I don't know,
1999.
Yeah, so a good 16 years, well before concussions have ever been a hot topic issue. But it's funny because now that this is a big issue with concussions, people are talking about it as if it's news, as if we didn't know.
Well, the interesting thing about it is that like you say, it's not new. I was actually reading something a while ago, which was basically just talking about the point of censorship in the media, where much like in the movie with the doctor like censoring the truth and the information because, well, he's basically being bribed by the owner, right? Like, you want your Christmas bonus, we need so and so healthy, like that he's the magic man to make the player healthy, and the magic is in administering the drugs and being evasive with what he says. And so it's not really like, in looking at this movie, whatnot, it's not to, blast, any particular player as like the root cause of it all. Is I think what it really showcases so much so is as a general point, us humanity as a culture, as a society, where we place our value, or where we, do not place our value, because there's just that general disregard really for the value of life and your fellow mates. Like, we're all here together. Like, there's just the war machine. It really, I find, football especially depicts it all, but all professional sports, I find. I mean, I think in the movie, actually, it also mentioned this point as it gets on, and you see the dichotomy and the conflicts, and just basically how who's involved with the professional sport has ruined their life in some capacity or another, whether it's specifically their body, or it's their relationships with their family or their friends, whatnot, or like their relationship to money. They pissed it all away through maybe substance abuse or prostitution, or just not being well educated and living beyond one's means. Basically, all these different ways in which people, squandered potential because of, the energy addiction, the self-interest that was rooted in and around the movement. So it wasn't really, true self-expression so much so, even if there was some natural talent within those points. Like, it kind of got lost due to, kind of being in a constant spiral out reaction. And to get to the point specifically that it showcased in the movie is where, the coach is talking with the assistant coach, the defensive line coach. And, he's saying that he's getting back to, he's going to go coach like high school football, because that's where it's really pure. Because the coach initially saying like, football was the only thing in life that was pure for him, because it's a game doesn't lie, it's a game of inches, whatnot. But then, his mate, his confidant, kind of says, hey man, don't bullshit yourself here. What we've been participating in for far too long is like totally out of whack, and not pure at all. Like, this is grotesque in so many ways. We've bought into it because, well, man, look at the life we've been able to live, or which in a lot of ways is bad, but just the money point about it, that they, you know, were encouraged to continue within that destructive lifestyle because the money was there to support that destructive lifestyle. Which is, I mean, an interesting point for, you know, the value in our society and our culture, where uh, a lot of attention is placed in and around, you know, the arenas and whatnot. And actually, the movie also brings up this point in the movie, where basically how an arena, like a stadium, is built in any city it's through the public taxpayers' money, even though the team that uses the facility is privately owned and generates the profits off the venue. The public citizens, you know, essentially the poor masses, foot the bill for this stadium, which could, you know, in turn, if you were to contrast it against something, could be used for more social good. Um, but it's kind of like a, you know, a hidden point, kind of like, you know, when you're doing maybe like a currency exchange from money, from this money to that money, and there's these hidden fees associated with it. Like, it's not common knowledge of how the expenses are being divvied up, and it really encourages that point of capitalism as, like, you know, you got to maximize profits at all cost. And then it showcases, you know, the upper elite who had their hand in being of an influence to how, let's say, the stadium gets approved, gets passed, like the mayor and the other people on the city council or the city planning committee. You know, they're all rewarded for helping the arena come into fruition by giving, you know, season tickets in one of the fancy seats, like the box seats. So not sitting with you know, the masses down low in the peanut gallery, if you will, but like up above in that, you know, social hierarchy type position.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, I mean, that just kind of showcases,
Well,
you know,
it's interesting.
where the majority vote is really.
Yeah, exactly,
Go.
exactly. It's already, it already has so much momentum that we should have, yeah, we should expect that is what the public will vote. I actually remember seeing a television debate where a person was protesting their city council because the city council would not approve the money, you know, taxpayers' money to pay for a stadium, and this person was complaining that, you know, her and her city's, you know, their taxpayer money wasn't going to paying for a pro sports stadium. So I mean, again, just going to show how big and what a religion pro sports has become and how much momentum it's gained. But yeah, this all takes us back to the point of, like, you know, what's it all for? Because as we've outlined, like, it can be a pretty grim, brutal game. You know, at one point when we were watching the film the other day, I sort of mentioned, like, this is a very, like, everybody in this film is having a very hard time. This is actually a very tragic film. If you were to take out the little bit at the end where everybody wins and there's that, you know, it comes to that nice resolve at the end. If you take that one singular point away, it's actually an extremely sad and tragic movie. And yeah, obviously, with all the money behind it, which, you know, again, to the film's credit, the film doesn't really censor that too much. It does show that, you know, it's all about money, money, money at the end of it. So you do have to ask that question of who's profiting. And that's where you start to realize that the ones who actually profit the most from all of this, from all of these many people and all of their efforts and everything they're doing, the people who are profiting from this the most are the ones that you never really hear about or see, you know. Although, as we were saying, it's become such a religion with so much momentum and so much compliance from the public that maybe that's changing a little. I mean, I know certainly, for instance, in the NFL, owners of teams are more known to the public than some other sports. But ultimately, the point is that the person who's profiting the most from all of this is the one that sacrifices their own body the least, in terms of immediate consequence anyway. And that is scrutinized the least, that is away and hidden from public eyes. That's not an accident.
Whoever's the most clever kind of thing. It's like, like outwit, like it's the art of deception, trickery, if you will, like sleight of hand in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a rich man's game. I mean, literally, some of these elites who own these teams are literally just doing nothing more than, playing little games with themselves and their friends, but where real people's lives are on the line and being affected and being harmed as a result, without really any real regard for that. And this is where the fan experience and how the general public perceives all this is so important, because the general public is basically doing the same thing, thinking that they have the same amount of stake of ownership in the team as the actual owner. I mean, it's very funny. For instance, here where we live in Ottawa, Canada, we've got a team called the Ottawa Senators, and people from Ottawa, Canada will go, "We love our Ottawa Senators," but in fact, they're not your Ottawa Senators. They are Eugene Melnick's
owned by a guy who primarily resides in the Barbados.
Exactly. So I mean, we are not the ones profiting or benefiting in any way from these teams winning or losing. Actually, if anything, we have to actually pay. We have to lose something for this to be a win. So who is it a win for?
Yeah, it's quite fascinating, even too, if you just consider that, everybody's time here on this earth is limited, or so it seems, if you will. There's only so many hours in the day, so many things to do, and just how do you want to spend your time? It kind of showcases just the grind, the strife of the everyday common man in this world is just kind of so beaten down that is looking for that point of escapism, or just that point of enjoyment, if you will. It is a Broadway show production. It is a spectacle of sorts that you're to the point where essentially you're so tired that you just want to sit back in your chair or on your couch, or this is your activity, is having some drinks and yelling at the other guys run around or whatever, that you wouldn't want to instead get up, gather some of your other fellow mates in the neighborhood and have your own football game where you're just throwing the ball around and kind of free flowing about it. You don't need all these referees per se, or to even wear all this equipment, kind of thing, because you were mentioning earlier with the whole injury point, I think there are several statistics in a lot of different sports that showcase as the equipment got more and more armor and strong and just hard, the injury rates have gone up and up and up and up, because if you look at the history in early professional sports, a lot of the players were still regular guys, if you will, that family men that maybe had a job as well. It wasn't just that's all they do as a professional athlete, is eat, breathe, live the sport. That's it. There's kind of more well-rounded individuals, if you will, and their sole focus wasn't to work their body up to the point of being able to hit somebody so hard, like a weapon, essentially. So, and that's kind of one aspect of it. And another point I know this was mentioned about like hockey, for instance, is that when, nobody's wearing a helmet and everybody's out there playing together, there's almost like a greater regard for one another because it's a recognition that you're all out here and you don't want anyone to get hurt. But when you kind of like, create the bubble world, if you will, where it's like, oh, well, they have their protection on them, so you can go out and try to kill them because they're in their bubble, so that, technically it's not your fault if you hurt them because they signed up for this and they're wearing their equipment. And so, what that propagates is like a lack thereof consideration and regard for your fellow man, and passing the buck of responsibility, accountability through the means of justification and blame, or that's just the way it is. It's the rules again, like the Law and Order military point, just following the rules, playing along with the song and pony show. One other point, just I'd like to mention what really aided me in seeing, I guess, a lot of these things also was, because I did grow up playing sports, and I could see as I got older, and well, actually, it was in coming to Destiny, the point about like, specifically that question, like, what is self-responsibility? Does the word self-responsibility exist inside you? And and me taking a look, it was like, what the shit is that? Like I don't know that. I don't have any semblance of this in me whatsoever. Um, and I mean, that's kind of mind-blowing consideration, a question of that magnitude. And, in just asking a simple question like that for yourself or another can really be, in fact, a stepping stone to, unlocking the Pandora's box of the extreme ridiculousness that is our own very acceptances and allowances, which, in turn is an outflow projection of the whole overall world, because it's all us here together in relationship. So it's not about, saying like, fuck this, fuck that, it's all fucked, it's all fucked, point of apathy and a point of like disempowerment, but it's all about the self-reflection within it as a point of self-responsibility, and in bringing it back to yourself, seeing like, how am I this? How do I exist in this relationship? Maybe it's not football, but maybe it's in, how I, go into combat reaction mode in my relationship with my partner, or when I'm at school, or, when I'm in the workplace and,
Yeah.
this particular employee enters the equation or whatnot, or when it's our work team, has a project to do and it's going to be judged against, the other department or whatnot. The whole like justification for the energy and the rivalry points. Um, yeah, really, it opens up a lot when you dare to ask some questions. And I mean, it's fascinating because, so much so, I mean, I face this myself, is that it's almost like, you don't, there's a fear around asking such questions because the addiction to what you're participating in is so strong. Well, you don't know anything else. And so it's like there's the fear of loss has got you by the balls at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's, that's what we're looking at really as our whole point, that it's an individual process as much as it is a collective process, where we all have to grab fear by the balls and take
Well,
accountability and dare to accept responsibility.
I mean, the reason why it can be difficult to question things, as you're saying, or for that matter, introduce maybe a new perspective on these things, is because the forces, and here I'm talking about the corporate powers and interests that are pushing the current narrative of what sports are, they have a vested interest in people not taking away from that and questioning that in any way, because it does threaten their whole, I was going to use the word game, but racket would be more appropriate now, wouldn't it?
That's, yeah.
But, you know, that is something that, despite what, you know, the corporatization and everything of the game does to the game, that is something that every person is able to do for themselves and implement as a practical solution, because it is true that these games were here before all of this corporatization and do not have to be defined by any of this. So there's a solution to all this, and that's where each person unto themselves can, you know, take a moment to think about these things for themselves and redefine, you know, what has been sullied and contaminated by money and fear and competition and self-interest and greed. And people can take a moment to take these sports and games and things that they do and redefine them to what they really truly are and ought to be, which are, it's just a game, you know. And so, for instance, one simple example would just be looking at something and going, okay, well, if it's just a game, you know, and what does that mean? Well, number one, no one gets hurt. You know, that is a new definition now that I could give to my understanding of what is a game, that I can live with and be really content with, because it's something that works for me and other people, you know. And that might seem like a very simplistic thing to do, but it's very important to take the time to, with yourself and maybe with, you know, your friends, your mates that you're playing with or wherever, and make a point of these things that, look, we're here to simply enjoy ourselves, to literally have a bit of fun in here in the physical world with balls and sticks and whatever it is we're playing with. And that's all there is to it. It's not us here trying to one-up each other, to prove how wonderful and great we are, to show off and try to convince others and impress others that we are better than we are. Is simply not why we're here. Maybe maybe the exact opposite of that is why we're here, is really to just explore and play around.
Totally, totally. And I mean, that's, I think the, you know, the greatest irony about this is that if we really question the relationship dynamics of ourselves and others, and you know, the whole togetherness of ourselves here as you know, like how we're feeding the corporation as it exists, if you will. And it was kind of cool because, you know, what you're bringing up here about, like, you know, the world as a corporation, as a business, so much so, it was even touched upon in the movie by you know, the third string quarterback who becomes the main quarterback, which is kind of quite fascinating because it kind of it showed just, you know, it wasn't a major point in the movie, but it did showcase the potential responsibility that is possible for somebody, you know, in basically being a pivotal point in educating many people in the world, because, you know, basically how things are, how they exist right now, you know, if you're in a position of well, say privilege and attention, you know, there's responsibility that comes with that. You know, like, what are you able to do to assist and support in a way that's for the betterment of everyone. And I mean, you know, that's really considering the big picture of the team, you know, removing the I in team and you know, making it about the team as a whole, like, as it not about just like one individual self-interest above and beyond the rest of the team. Yeah, so I mean, that I see really, you know, in this day and age, for, let's say, any, you know, professional athlete who is watching at this time. I mean, you know, that's what I would say is a dare to be cool, if you will, for real, is to call out, you know, like, shit for what it is, and talk about, you know, real issues in the world, and basically the relationship points, like, bring attention to it and whatnot. I think why that is a commonly suppressed point, I mean, there's, you know, corporate interests, they don't want that, they want to keep, you know, making the profit, whatnot. stimulate the masses through their emotions. And also I think, it's pushed the point of fear even on the players, is that, you know, a whistleblower will be, removed or taken out, kind of thing. And the fear around speaking up, which, I mean, really is unacceptable. And it is ridiculous because, if we just look at the point of majority rule, but if the majority are in fear of ruling, if you will, like as the shared togetherness, as making a collective awesome ensemble, then you're going to have, the few that dare to rule as the rulers, as, the so-called dictatorship in which we have here, as, the dick and the tater coming together. I mean, a real penis potato kind of thing. I mean, that's a ridiculous equation I just put together there. A dick and a tater. Yeah. Pardon my strong language. Okay, Adrian, we can continue onward and outward, reflecting inward on this. Final thoughts, 1 minute or less.
Yeah, well, you said the word leadership. Ultimately, that's what's really required, is to be a leader and to be a self-leader above all. To not, because you're going to be faced with the scale and the magnitude of the momentum of something like, pro sports and how popular it is. It's not to go against it or to be against it per se. It's merely to really assist people to expose it for what it is through having done the same thing with yourself, which means to basically have been honest with yourself sufficiently to realize what it all really is, sufficiently to support yourself to actually, well, make the whole thing a better experience for yourself, is really what we're trying to do for ourselves and other people. So, yeah, really just a bit of self-honesty and be careful in terms of what you accept and allow yourself to participate in. Is it really a game? Is it really just for fun? And that's all there is to it? Or is maybe something else taking place there?
Well said, Adrian. I totally agree with you there. I mean, it's fascinatingly, ironically, tragically funny in so many ways, because, with the self-honesty point here, talking as a self-leader, one is able to see of, like, how things could actually be a lot better than they are. It's not about just saying, like, oh, get rid of this, we can't have fun or whatnot. It's to showcase, like, outline how there is such suppression of, fun, the fun potential here. It's like, the whole sport point, professional sports, seeing how it's become so commercialized. I mean, wouldn't it be cool to actually, if you really enjoy a particular sport, to be able to watch that sport, so much so commercial advertisement free. But, it's like, again, the whole business structure of how it's built up around it. I mean, watching an NFL football game, to go back to football and the core point on the movie, is, it's painfully slow, really. Like, it's, I mean, I don't even know how many commercial breaks are built physically into the game. And it's not just the NFL. I know professional hockey, where we live also, they have extra stops in the play for commercial TV timeout to stimulate impulse to advertising on those energetic points. The hypnotism. I mean, is that the type of, world we should be voting for? Is where we, consent that we're supposed to hypnotize each other for, to try to be more clever than the next guy, as, like, he falls for the spell of my spelling, so to speak, as like not seeing how, the veneer beneath my words are like the wolf in sheep clothing kind of thing. Yeah, it's you know, let's see how we can improve the awesome here. And there's a lot of ways.
It is very boring. So boring that you would have to wonder, are people hypnotized to be able to watch this? It's so boring. Again, maybe that goes
or want to get booze bagged or stoned or high or something. I mean, that would incapacitate yourself further, so that you can participate in that activity that everyone else is around you participating in, or the majority. It's kind of like, well, monkey see, monkey do. Da 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 da. Anywho,
we've been there,
Adrian. Yeah. It all starts with that question. What is self-responsibility? Does self-responsibility exist within me? How have I been in this point? Again, to reflect on myself in first looking at that point, my relationship with the word responsibility was that it's something you want to avoid. That's how you profit or get stuff in this world, is through the abdication of responsibility. Is that you're winning more so when you have less responsibility. But that is kind of fictitious in and of its word vocabulary relationship design, which in and of itself is a topic for a whole other day. Adrian, again, thank you for being here. A real pleasure. I'll see you when I go upstairs. Everyone, thanks for being here. Possibly the movie Hangout for next week will be Vanilla Sky, though we do take requests also. But I will be your host again next week, Friday, same time, same channel, 3 p.m. Eastern time. You can use the converter in the links below to do the math on what that time is in other parts of the world. Thank you. Have a great night. Cheers. Oh,